Okay, I hope we are on screen right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. My name is Long Vu again. The seventh time. I hope you are not tired of what I'm saying every week. Today I don't have to talk alone like in front of the computer anymore. I have a guest with me. His name is Hung Vu. He's a game expert and he also translated a lot of books about games from English to Vietnamese. He's now living in Hanoi, Vietnam, and he is quite famous among the game communities in Vietnam and Asia. So let's welcome him to the class right now. Probably we'll have this presentation from him. So do you think you need around like 45 minutes to an hour? And then we can have like a Q&A after that. Sounds good?
That sounds great.
Okay, thank you. The star of the show today, Hung Vu, the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Long. So hello everyone. Thank you for having me again. I'm Hung Fu, or maybe you can call me Alex. That's my also kind of my favorite English name. If you have noticed, also we I and Long share the same family name, share the same last name, which is quite a common thing in Vietnam. For myself, I'm kind of a hybrid between game developer and a game theorist. Since everything about games really excite me, so I'm happy to be here for this class and helping you dive into the core question of what it means to live a second life. And I'm very happy that today we're going to examine this topic through the lens of my favorite things ever, video games. So my may I start with the presentation?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
All right. So my session today is titled "Beyond the Illusion: Video Games as the Real Second Life." Kind of playing off what your lecturer said before there.
Yeah,
So
so
guiding our discussion. Yeah, yeah.
mhm.
You say?
So when you try to share the screen, I will just wanna spill the tea a little bit. So Home will have some kind of criticism toward me. I talk with you about individualism, and the idea of second life as some kind of illusion. And today, Home is gonna deconstruct. I will talk about deconstruction later in later classes. But today, let's see what Hung have anything to show us about like deconstruction. But let's say that is some kind of criticism or some kind of let's say the unfolding of the second life, but from a different perspective. Okay, so I think you can share the slide to everyone.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Give me a moment.
Okay, I can see it now.
Yeah. All right. So so I'll be guiding our discussion using what I call today the play-driven approach, which kind of looks at digital spaces not just as code, but as sites of human action and agency. And I would say it's probably more like a discussion, and it's not simply just a criticism of what Long said. I will also reinforce a lot of his points. All right. So I mean, for sure that in this course you're grappling with some, massive philosophical questions, and I want to briefly connect my session to those core ideas. You're challenging the old notion of identity, right? The course introduces the idea of the individual, which I really like, which is a very fascinating idea to me, that our self isn't a single fixed point, but rather a flexible networked identity entity that expresses different versions of itself depending on the digital context that it's in, right? You have one self of your professional networks, perhaps a different one for your creative platforms like Instagram or Pinterest or whatever, and certainly a unique one for your gaming community. And this naturally leads into the question about reality. If we have these divisible selves, right? Do they live in truly separate worlds? The idea of a second life promises a total escape, a way to leave your problems behind, your body behind, and your constraints behind. The old the old fiction writer William Gibson called the mid space, right? Just leave everything behind and go into the cyberspace. But the course challenges you to ask, is that separation an illusion? Does the digital world simply reflect the politics, the biases, and economic structures of the physical world? And I'm here today to argue that video games are the perfect test case for both of these concepts colliding. And they are specifically designed to help us create those unique, divisible identities, and they create the strongest possible illusion of escape. But because of that intense focus, they also provide the clearest evidence of how the digital and the real are constantly merging together. So let me introduce you to the approach we will use today, the play-driven approach. This approach is essential for navigating the conflict we identified, the tension between the platform's agenda and our own human needs. And so Mr. Long previously warned us about the technopoly, the structure where the needs of the technology, primarily profit and engagement, begin to dominate human needs. So when platforms and games view us merely as passive users, we are essentially being treated as inputs, sources of data, attention, and revenue. So to combat this, we need to shift our thinking from being a passive user to an active citizen. A user follows the rules of the system, but a citizen, by contrast, participates, organizes, and demands that their fundamental values, like, say, privacy, fairness, community, um, those things be respected within that domain. And this approach is the tool that makes this shift possible. It highlights the agency that exists not just in big, grand acts of resistance, but in the small, ongoing choices inherent in our play process, right? Um, it's a call to look beyond the developer's intention and focus on the meaning that we, the players, actively create. And by adopting this perspective, I think we stop accepting the illusion that the game's rules are absolute. Instead, we treat the virtual space as flexible medium that we can intentionally shape together. So our ultimate goal isn't just to escape reality, like a form of escapism, is to use the digital world as a creative extension, a place where we can successfully implement the best parts of our, first life values. And now to trying to apply these identity concepts directly to games. If we look at player behavior, we see the individual in its most explicit and dynamic form. Players are constantly adopting and managing multiple, very context specific identities. The self that you project as a hardened veteran, raiding in a massive multiplayer online game is vastly different from the self that you present as a peaceful, creative neighbor in a social sandbox game like Animal Crossing, right? So each of these personas, whether it's fully customized avatar or just a username and a profile icon, right, is a different, working assumption of your identity, perfectly tailored to that specific digital context. This directly confirms the course's point that you are not a single fixed I, but a constellation of personas. And crucially, this digital identity is not isolated. The self in the virtual world is now strongly defined by its performance and reputation. If you are a celebrated leader in a guild, in an MMO, for example, or a skilled competitor on a leaderboard, or a helpful resource in the game community, then that status, that social capital, are incredibly real. The emotional investment and the social validation gained in the game will follow you across platforms, often translating directly into your real world sense of status, your sense of social belonging and your self-efficacy. And so this is why we treat the game self as divisible but fully integrated part of our total identity. So let's look at the first key example of the individual self as an expression of agency, which is the creation of multiple personas. So in large, persistent online worlds, players actively choose to manage two or more completely distinct characters, often called the alt, the alternative account. So this practice is not just about changing your clothes; it's a deliberate social strategy. For instance, a player might maintain one character as the highly demanding raid leader, responsible, very serious, very focused on competition with other guilds. They simultaneously maintain a second character who is a relaxed, very silly social merchant dedicated only to crafting items for other people and trading them. So the player is intentionally separating their identity, their individual self, to manage two separate sets of social expectations and personal goals. The raid leader individual cannot fail without social consequence, but the social merchant individual is free to experiment and relax. So this intentional deployment of different selves proves that we are actively using the digital space to explore and manage our identity with high degrees of autonomy. And the second example of the individual's agency is how reputation becomes currency. I think this is the most clearly seen in competitive gaming. In titles like League of Legends or Valorant, your rank, whether you are a gold or you are a diamond rank, it is a form of digital status. It is an instantly recognized symbol of competence, skill, and commitment. It provides immediate context about your performance history. So this status isn't just cosmetic. It dictates your social capital. Your ranking determines which competitive teams that will accept you or the kinds of advice that you are socially permitted to give and how seriously your opinions are taken in discussions about games or maybe other things too. Sometimes maybe politics too. Um, so a digital performance has immediate, tangible social value. The consequences go beyond the screen. This digital status influences the player's real world self-esteem and social confidence. Being recognized as highly skilled provides you genuine validation, a sense of validation, directly connecting your digital success to your first life psychological well-being. This is powerful evidence of the individual at work. Your digital performance is actively shaping your self-perception. And our third powerful example of the individual's agency lies in the creation of the aspirational selves. Games like Animal Crossing or The Sims are prime examples of this. They are platforms dedicated to cultivating sort of an aesthetically or socially ideal version of life. Players spend enormous amounts of time designing perfect homes, curating beautiful communities, or building successful virtual businesses that may be difficult to achieve in their physical lives. The primary function of practice here is intentional self-design. The game provides a low-stakes environment where the player can safely practice being a perfect host, a successful entrepreneur, or a skilled interior designer, right? The player is using the digital world to master an identity that feels stable, successful, and aesthetically pleasing. And I think this directly relates to the concept of, agency of design. The game offers a sense of control and order that is often elusive in the complexity of the first life of the mid space. By achieving success and order in the virtual world, the player strengthens their individual self and that psychological success then informs their confidence and perspective in the real world. This proves that the digital space is not just a mindless escape. It is actively utilized as a deliberate tool for self-improvement and self-realization. And my favorite example, perhaps the most definitive example of the individual self, is the professional individual, the identity of the streamer or a gaming content creator. So for this group, their digital presence moved past being just a hobby. Their identity is their income. The persona they build, the characters they play, and the communities they cultivate become their primary professional self. This is the ultimate proof of the digital real, the merging of the digital and the real, as the digital identity is directly linked to the real world financial stability and career and the entire career of these streamers. This curated performance is a fascinating study in individual creation. This version of the self is constantly broadcasting and monetizing its actions. It is a highly intentional, meticulously maintained, and almost always on persona. Um, this individual operates in a totally public space. It is also highly susceptible to community judgment. A simple misstep, you know, a controversial comment, or a loss of reputation can have immediate, devastating real-world consequences for their career. I think this shows that the individual is not just flexible, but also fragile, underscoring the weight and reality of maintaining a public second life. So let's now confront the core challenge, which is the illusion of a separate life. Um, so what Mr. Long said was very clear, that the digital world is not truly separate. It's financially and politically bound to our first life. This is where your insight about the individual is critical. While we celebrated the individual as an act of player agency on the previous slide, the game system simultaneously reduces you to a different external form of the individual. A set, which is a set of data points. Every single player action, every click, every pause, every purchase, and every abandonment of a game level is tracked and distilled into metrics. You are no longer seen as a complex individual, but as a composite of statistics, a whale probability, or churn risk, or a conversion rate, everything that is about the statistics of what you do on the game. So this reduction of the player to exploitable data points is the foundation of Postman's technopoly. The system's needs, which are profit and engagement, now dominate the complex reality of the player. Features like microtransactions and battle passes are the most obvious, red thread, or the cable connecting the game to the real world. They aren't designed purely for fun. They are designed to impose real world economic pressures that force you to operate on the game's schedule and subordinate your free time to its demands. And ultimately, this constant behavioral tracking demonstrates that the platform operates under a form of surveillance capitalism, proving that your second life is never truly free from the structure of your first. Oh, I'm so sorry. The image is broken here. But anyway, it clearly demonstrates my point about illusory freedom there. I have no freedom over this picture. You know, um, so let's look at the first example of the illusory freedom. This is extremely common in the mobile gaming space. In any game utilizing the free-to-play model, the promise is total escape and unrestricted adventure. But the reality, however, is that your progress is quickly bottlenecked. You hit a wall where the time required to advance becomes so high, it becomes so astronomical. or the chance of getting a powerful item is infinitely small, the system has structurally designed an imbalance. So this is an sort of an extraction strategy that prioritizes the platform's financial health. Players are pushed toward virtual gambling systems, the gacha mechanism, where they spend real world money to bypass the deliberately imposed bottlenecks. So this perfectly illustrates Postman technopoly. The system is not designed to serve your human desire for fun, but to serve its own need for revenue, thereby eroding your autonomy. The second example is about the direct erosion of your first life autonomy. The primary goal of the system is often to maximize time on platform, or TOP, which is a key metric for investors in games. Um, this leads to mechanics that are engineered to be compulsive and not necessarily fun. Think of daily lock-in streaks or battle passes that expire after a month. So these features exploit what you know as the fear of missing out, or FOMO. They don't just reward you for logging in; they punish you for not logging in. You are forced to follow a rigid external schedule imposed by the game to avoid losing investment or missing out on scarce content, which is the technopoly at its clearest, right? The platform is making decisions about your time and schedule, proving that your free Second Life adventure is actually highly controlled and subordinated to the platform's needs. This next point moves into the territory of surveillance capitalism by showing how games leverage real-world psychological pressures. Platforms engage in subtle exploitation by selling items like virtual cosmetics or rare skins, which have zero impact on gameplay mechanics. They are purely aesthetics. But why do players spend thousands of dollars on these, right? Because the platform is exploiting deep real world psychological pressures like social comparison and status anxiety. The FOMO, the fear of missing out, is weaponized by creating manufactured scarcity and high visibility around these items. The game successfully translates the first life desire for social status into a second life commodity purchase. So the cost of status is real. The player's individual must pay real money to acquire purely social capital in the virtual world. And this confirms that the second life reflects the biases, the values, and the economic pressures of the first. And finally, I think while you, the player, feel like a complex, autonomous individual, the system views you differently. The system view is statistical. You are reduced to a set of cold, exploitable data points. Your activity is continuously tracked, not just your purchases, but every click, every pause, every social interaction, and every moment you hesitate near the in-game store. And the goal of this extraction is not to ask, are you having fun? But what behavior can we trigger to increase your spending? The data is used to constantly refine this monetization model. I think this is the ultimate expression of the external individual that you have pointed out earlier. The complex human is statistically disassembled into an exploitable profile. This proves that the system needs are constantly working against the player's autonomy, making critical awareness, our which is our play-driven approach, absolutely necessary to reclaim our agency. And after analyzing the technopoly, I think the most important question is how do we fight back, right? How do we resist against this trend? I think we fight back by fully embracing the play-driven approach and exercising our own agency. The goal is to use the digital world as a creative extension of our real life rather than simply an escape. We achieve this by becoming active citizens who shape the system, not passive users who merely consume. And this approach is very clearly seen in two areas, which is modding and virtual communities. Modding is the act of players literally altering the game's code, or using its tools in ways that the developers never intended to create something new. This is a clear example of what a critical theory calls a tactic, a human way of um, subverting the institutional strategy. Similarly, virtual communities use game spaces like the one in mentioned by Mr. Long in the module, the game Second Life, to host real-world discussions, educational workshops, or even uh, very interestingly, even political gatherings, proving that the digital world is a functional extension of our civic life. And finally, there is player advocacy, where communities organize against predatory monetization, or excessive data collection, or in-game toxicity. They are demanding that our first life values, say fairness, equality, and justice, be respected in the virtual domain. Our thoughtful, critical choices in game are the most powerful way to weaken the illusion, restore our agency, and foster genuine, meaningful connection. So I want to elaborate a bit more on the examples that I just mentioned. After analyzing the constraints of the technopoly, we we are now shifting to the empowering side of this discussion, which is how we actively reclaim our agency. And the very first example is modding and remixing. This is the purest act of creative subversion in the digital world. Modding is when players intentionally alter the game's code, alter the game's graphics or content to create something entirely new. And this goes beyond the developer's vision and the platform's constraints, creating new rules, new stories, or entirely new social spaces. And I think this practice proves the fundamental point of our approach, which is that the system is not absolute. When players succeed in modding a complex game, they show that the digital world is a flexible medium. It is a construction that can be taken apart and reassembled, and not just a rigid prison of code. Every successful mod is an act of agency of creation, where the player shifts their role from a passive consumer to an active builder and designer. And our second example focuses on the emergent communities. This is where the individual self decides to put human needs first, using the virtual platform not for its intended purpose, which is for gaming or something like that, but for organization and connection. We've seen incredibly powerful examples of this, players using games like Minecraft, VR chat, or even Fortnite to host political rallies, conduct educational sessions, or run genuine cultural events. The game engine becomes the venue and not the content. And furthermore, these groups often practice self-governance. They create their own explicit social contracts and systems of justice, moral rules that go above and beyond the code of the game itself. By intentionally prioritizing values like empathy, justice, and collaboration, the players are actively demanding that these first life values be respected in their second life adventures. And the third example is the most direct confrontation with the technopoly, which is player advocacy. This is where the player shifts from being a passive user to an active citizen. So when the system engages in unfair practices, players organize to challenge it. This collective action is a powerful mechanism for pushing back on the technopoly, proving that the platform is subject to player pressure and not just silent data metrics. A recent globally recognized example of this is the scandal from the game Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box, from which was from 2017, I think. This game launched with loot boxes tied directly to a player's power and progression, essentially forcing players to pay real money for a competitive advantage. And this was a direct attempt to turn the game into a pure technopoly. Um, so the player community, the citizens of the game, staged a massive public boycott and social media campaign. And this collective resistance demonstrated financial resistance by making the game unprofitable at launch. The public pressure was so intense that Disney, the license holder of the game, actually intervened, and the developers were forced to temporarily remove all in-game purchases. And this incident proves that the players, when acting collectively, hold real financial power and can successfully enforce the values of fairness and ethical practice against the platform's attempts to maximize profits. And our final example of agency is more personal and perhaps the most philosophical, which is role playing and emergent narrative. This is about intentional ethics. A player might choose to adopt a strict moral code. Say, they want to be a purely pacifist character in a violent game, or a criminal with a specific code of honor, even if the game's mechanics reward the opposite behavior. This is an explicit act of rejecting the code. The player is choosing to prioritize a human made story and relationship ethics over the game's programmed algorithmic goals. So, in this practice, players find meaning over metrics. They define their success not by the levels they gain or the loot that they acquire, but by the personal significance and genuine human connection that they foster. The true individual here chooses to define their success by humanistic values like empathy, loyalty, and perhaps storytelling, proving that they have transcended the illusion and fully integrated their first life morality into the second life. And to wrap up our session, let's bring it back to the big picture. Our main takeaway today is that the second life is not a separate world. It is the sort of porous boundary between your identity and the screen. The illusion weakens the moment that you stop treating the digital world as just a consumer space and start treating it as a civic space deserving of your critical attention. This means that your play, your intentional, thoughtful choices in game, is your most powerful tool of agency to challenge the technopoly. We have the power to stop being merely data points and start being creative citizens. I want to leave you with a reflective question, something to carry with you through the rest of this module and the course, which is that how can we ensure that our first life values, empathy, justice, and fairness, actively guide the creation and expression of our individual selves in virtual spaces. And that's it from me. The last thing I'd like to say is, go forth and be citizens of your digital worlds. And thank you for engaging with these complex issues. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for the great presentation, and I could note down some of like so many points from your presentation here. I think my student will love your presentation so much. As some kind of theorist of some very general issues, like because I work on social media and technological platform. I don't have the exact example for them to like yourself to dive into like a specific case studies like this. And I know
Yeah.
that around like 5 to 10% of this class will be game developers in the future. So I hope they could learn a lot from they could learn a lot from your insight today. One of the points I love the most about your presentation is um, representation as currency, and it clearly show like some kind of symmetrical relationship between our first life and our second life. As I often emphasize in some of my classes before, and it's something that resemble actually the meritocratic society that we're actually living right now. Like you have to go to school and you have to earn some kind of qualification from educational systems, and when you go outside society, you want to find a job, you have to show people that hey, these are my reputations. I have these great marks, and I have these great seminars, and so on and so forth. And the rank of my university is like in top like 500 or something like that. Um, and it actually leads me to this question about the exposure of you on the internet. So my first question for you um, is ranking valuable to you when you're an anonymous user? Because I know that I used to live with my cousin in Canada, and he's like a huge gamer, and he spent like probably like 8 hours of his life every day on playing LOL, and sometimes he always shout in his room, but to be honest, no one know who he is. So is this actually valuable for a gamers like sitting in the basement without having like an actual avatar on his second life? Is representation valuable for him?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think first of all, I have to say, which is also to reinforce your point earlier about the meritocracy, and I think we are never truly free from metrics. I mean, whether it's the second life or the first life, we are always look at metrics or look at uh, you know um, some sort of scoring system to gain points on some kind of scoring system somewhere to constantly gain values on our image, on our reputation, and which is the first part. And your question is ranking valuable to you when you are anonymous on the internet? I think um, my theory. I'm not too confident on this, but my theory is when a player is completely anonymous, the primary audience for the ranking is not the community, but the player's own individual self. The need for the rank moves from sort of external social validation to internal proof of competence and mastery. Um, I think the act of achieving a high rank, like a diamond rank in a game like Valorant or League of Legends, like you mentioned earlier, proves that the player successfully mastered the game's complex system. And it's not entirely about bragging rights. It's about I think the agency of execution. Because the rank sort of becomes a symbol that validates the time and the effort or the skill invested, and regardless of who knows the anonymous ID of your account, uh, nobody knows who you are, but the rank is there to validate for yourself the time and effort and skills that you invested in there. Um, and I think it also play off what I mentioned earlier about the aspirational self. I think it proves to the player that they possess the skills and the discipline that they themselves values in the first life. Um, this achievement confirms a core identity trait. Say, for example, okay, I am smart, I am persistent, I am effective. So I think that's what's going on there.
Thank you for your answer. It's a great one. So let's sum up like it's let's say from my perspective, there are like two kinds of validation, the external validation and the internal validation. So let's say that if you are some kind of like a visible user on the internet, when you have your reputation, it's something for you to like to brag a little bit with your own community, or it's some kind of like community building, or community bonding. But for example, if you don't actually have a community, it's some kind of, let's say that your different individual selves, they bond with each other and create this community of themselves. Because if you say that internal validation is something like, okay, you brag with yourself, actually you are bragging with different selves that you have on the internet.
That's true. Yeah.
It's just a crazy theory of mine, but when you're on the internet, in a way or others, you are visible to the machine, and the machines it creates different avatar of you through times. And so in a way, when you interact with the algorithm and you interact with the artificial intelligence system, in a way you also interact with your own past, the way you input your information into the computer, and the way the computer generate like different selves of you. So I think it's a very thoughtful thing to think about. I have a second question for you. Since you mentioned a lot about agency, it's something very simple, but I want to ask you as someone working in the game industry, because I heard a lot from other game developer I happen to meet on campus. They say that it's very common for people in the game industry to like to release like beta version of your game and to collect feedback from your users. So sometimes like the beta can be very bad, and you collect like a lot of negative feedbacks, and you try to improve yourself from that. You don't try um to create like a perfect version of the game like from the beginning. So my question is it common for users to send feedback to developers when the game is established already? And how do companies actually handle the feedback?
Oh, very interesting question. I think, of course, developers. I think the so in the past, right? Developers actually release games um, when when they are truly finished to a point. Because of the nature of the distribution channels back then, which was once the game is shipped out of the door, then they have no way to alter the code of the game anymore. Um, once the games have hit the store, go on the shelves, then developers have no way to control what happens after that. But right now, when the distribution channels have changed to a lot to a lot of online digital storefronts like Steam or Google Play or Apple App Store, things like that. Um, distribution becomes so much more fluid. Like say for example, the common practice of game developers now is I think what they call the best practice of releasing games right now is to release as many beta versions as possible, which is what they call soft launches. They soft launch the game every could be every week or every month or every 3 months or things like or some sort of time frame like that. And they want to release games as fast as possible. And of course, it also means that they can release very bad beta versions, and sometimes that leave a bad taste in the mouth of gamers, of the players. But the point of that, the if that frustration is exactly what developers want, because they want actual real data, congregated from players all around the world as soon as possible, so that they can use that data to actually build the game the way that players want, or in the way that developers think will benefit them. So um, in terms of how common it is to for developers to release games as fast as possible and as many times as frequently as possible. It is certainly a very common practice in the current game industry. And what was your actual question again? Is it common for game developers to gather player feedback? Was that it?
And how do they handle the feedback? Because I know that you can receive like millions of feedbacks a day, especially
Yeah,
when your company is established already.
yeah. I From what I've seen, of course, there are qualitative and quantitative feedback. And my from my observation, it is increasingly becoming more quantitative, and it's getting way less about qualitative feedback now, which means that, um, and of course, there are some merits to that. I mean, there was a very famous quote from Henry Ford, the guy who created the cars. You know, he said something like, if we actually listen to what the customers want, then we would only have faster horses, and we wouldn't have cars. We would only have faster horses. And so, what I'm trying to say is there's actually some merit to that, because it is not actually that reliable to listen to what the players say they want, and it's equally important to look at what they actually want, or look at what they actually do, and not just what they say that they want, or not just what they think they believe. Um, so I think there's of course some merit to the quantitative side of the way that developers are looking at player feedback, which is not to actually just listen to them, but also to look at what they actually do in the game from the metrics, from the all of the tracking metrics that we talked about earlier. And but yeah, I think the perhaps it's the more insidious side of the game industry right now is it's become increasingly more like a surveillance capitalism. It is increasingly more about the metrics, all about the analytics that game developers are tracking the players. They reduce players into just simple, data points to collect, and there's some sort of a sense of playing God right there, which is to not recognize the players as individual, and instead to look at them as just some sort of machines that generate sort of data points that do a lot of things in these virtual spaces, and just to look at events, or look at different aspects of the game through just, okay, so how many people, or how many, well, not how many people, but how many clicks, or how many avatars that go through this door, how many avatar that click on this button or whatever. So I think that's what the game industry is become increasingly about, and I don't
Yeah.
really like
Oh,
that.
yeah. Or how much time you actually spend looking at
Yeah,
the screen.
yeah,
And it totally makes sense to me because as you talk about like quantitative measurements and qualitative measurement, I feel like it's so hard, especially in this industry, to collect like actual qualitative measurements. I I just want to share this, but I used to work with a tech company in Vietnam. It's actually like a virtual marketplace, and we actually have a lab in which we invite around like 16 participants, just trying to scroll the app and use the app every day, and we try to observe their behavior, and we try to study from them to see like, okay, so what kind of button do they want to do they want to click on, and what kind of color is more shiny to them compared to other colors, and what region, what area on the screen they want to look at the most. And then when we work at like the data brokers and other companies, they will try to put an ad into that. So if you constantly look at the point on the screen, for example, this one, they'll put an ad on it. So it's something
Yeah.
very funny, but of course, like the project fails after only like 3 or 4 months because we actually don't have the capacity to collect that much data only with like interviews and stuff like that. So the solution here is we just put a lot of data, a lot of updates, and we try to collect like the numbers from people's actual interaction. um, I have another question for you, and so sorry that even though I sent you like 3 questions beforehand, but after your presentation, I feel like, oh my gosh, they don't make no sense. So I'm trying to I'm trying to ask you something more relevant. But this one seems to be a little bit down to earth. What is it like to be a game expert? And does it make it less enjoyable for you when playing video games?
Wow, that is certainly a hard question. Um, Man, that is so existential. I mean, I got into this in this whole game thing, making games and studying games because I love them. I mean, as a kid, I played video games a lot, and I was also very fortunate that my parents, um, they had the financial capacity to let me play games. I know that a lot of people in my country in Vietnam, they didn't really have the fortune of playing video games, and so the my generation of people playing games was actually people of middle class, um, middle class families, or I mean only people from middle class families had the opportunity to play games back then. So it's um, so what I'm trying to say is that the it's not actually, it's let's say it's not actually a um, what to say, it, I don't know where I was going with that, but anyway, to go back to the point, but yeah, I had the fortune of playing games very early, and that kept going. I think I was very fortunate that I didn't um, I didn't succumb to other interests or other influence, very bad influences in my communities at the time. Um, so so I think around sometime in seventh or eighth grade, I sort of found a a game engine on the CD on a that my that some IT guy from my dad's company came to install on a family's PC. So that got me going into into making games and to be more curious about games. So from playing video games to learning more about, okay, I can actually do something that to create this stuff, to create something, and not just consuming it. That sort of lit a fire in me in a way, that okay, this is actually not just some mere entertainment. It is actually some kind of space, some kind of activity, or maybe it could very well be a career that I couldn't imagine at the time, but there was some potential there. So things like that sort of created a motivation, a drive for me to sort of keep pursuing this stuff. But okay, anyway, that's how I started. But I think after engaging with the game development industry, and studying more about games, like or what's happening around the world in the game industry, it certainly makes you lose a lot of interest in um, in making games or in continuing to pursue games. Um, I mean, of course, in during the COVID pandemic, the game industry sort of soared very high, and a lot of people, a lot of talented people were brought into the game industry, and it seemed like a very good time for the game industry. But and I and at the time, I actually thought it was only going to get better from there. But actually, it's sort of like um, the rise of the game industry during the COVID pandemic was only sort of temporary, and it's sort of resulted in the bounce back into the normal trajectory of the game industry, which is that in last year in 2024, a lot of people, I think 800,000 people were laid off from the game industry last year, which was a very very low point, and a lot of people call it the historical low of the game industry. So there's a lot to be said about that. But let's say things like that happen in the game industry a lot, and it's kind of getting worse in a lot of ways, especially in terms of labor and workers in the game industry. So things like that kind of make you lose lose some hope, lose some interest in the game industry, and but very big but there. I think I have lost interest in the game industry quite a few times before. But last year, I had sort of a turning point where I attended this class about liberal arts in Vietnam. I attended a class called something like um, the way back into the Vietnamese identity. And that class sort of opened my eyes into the way that my the way that previous generation sort of look at the world at the time, and it was a very dark place. But they actually thought about the solution, and not just being very cynical about it. And they actually got very smart about it, and they did everything they could to come up with solution and actually achieve something very grand and very ambitious. And I looked at that and I was like, wow. I mean, I want to be someone that give hope to people too. And I cannot give hope by just being this cynic sitting in the corner of my room, complaining about video games, complaining about the industry. And I so um, so I got rid of that cynical attitude, and I started a class about game appreciation, and from all of these things, and which includes a lot of the things that I mentioned today in my session too. Um, and actually, the reception of that class was very positive, and that also sort of gives me hope about the game industry, and I'm sort of more assured now about that the game industry can certainly change and become something better, and I can contribute to that future. So I think at least for now, and I do also believe in the future that I'm going to be more hopeful, and it's not just a sort of a self-assuring in a self-assuring way, but I do think that attitude, that hopeful attitude, is going to be more is going to actually help in a lot of ways, and not just in a way that just um, you know help me cope with the reality. So yeah, that's kind of a long question, but yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's truly an existential question in a way. Like, if you ask me, like, how's academia? Like, after like walking into academia, do you love academia anymore? If I have like another 3 hours to run, I would just
yeah,
telling you that okay, this the funding application is so bad, and then I have to handle like so many huge classes per year, and I don't have time for myself, and so on and so forth. But if
yeah,
you ask me, like, okay, so do you want to find another job or something like that? I would be like,
yeah,
probably not. Probably I couldn't live without it in a way. So yeah, I can totally share with you about that. And probably I only have like one last question for you, and it's something related to the final essay the student will have to write probably next year. So they will still have a lot of time. They have another 6 or 7 months, something, hopefully. And it's about like building a dream world on the internet. Like if they have the power to create their own second life, what will it be like? And I got the inspiration from the actual game Second Life because the promise is very big. It's like it's a game, but actually it's not a game. It's something like an early model, social media in the present day. They don't have levels and they don't have like an actual goal. The goal they have is to build something new. So with this idea in mind, if you have the power to build this second world from scratch, what would your dream second life be like?
yeah. That's a very interesting question, and I think about this question a lot too. I think there are a few qualities of a dream second life in my life, at least from what I have observed in the game industry or maybe even the software industry at large. I think the first quality is open source software. That I mean, of course, open source is not just is it it's not just about opening up your software, opening up the child of your labor uh, to the world and to let the world do whatever they want with it. It's not just about that. Um, I mean, you can have varying degrees of openness in your open source software, and and I want that the software industry or the game industry think more about opening up their games or opening up the software to the world, to other you know freelance or solo or indie developers to look at, to evaluate them, to uh, to actually or what's the word there? I forget the word to um, what's the word to sort of anyway to sort of evaluate whether the code actually works like the way that software companies say they work. Um, but yeah, so transparency, open source means transparency, and I want more transparency in the second life. And from that quality, it I think once software is open source, it will also lead into the second quality of my dream second life, which is to democratize whatever virtual spaces that you are in, right? Just like you have the choice, you have the freedom to build your house. I think you should also have the freedom to build your own virtual spaces for yourself and for people that share some sort of values with you on the internet. Say, for example, um, and I think the first quality is open source, and that's already something that's happening in the world, and increasingly software is becoming more open source because the old model is, I think, is corrupt. The old model is sort of corroding right now. You know, a lot of incidents in the game industry, like say for example, previously in 2023, Unity, which is um, a very famous, very popular game engine, sort of got into fire um, by announcing a new way to monetize games that are made with Unity, which was that I think it was very predatory, which was that any game that makes more than I don't really remember any games that or even games that were made with Unity before that announcement date. Any game that made more than $1 million would from that point get charged for get charged for every installation of the game. Um, uh, I don't really remember the actual number, but it was, but by charging by charging the developer for every installation of the game that they make, that's already a predatory practice, and the game development scene and the player community pushed back against that and actually forced Unity to redo that to remove that policy announcement, and Unity actually apologized to the community after that, and actually I think they fired the CEO at that time. Um, but yeah, so incidents like that actually drove people from using licensed engines like Unity into more open source engines like Godot, for example. So that engine was it started as a hobby project for a few game developers, game engineers, but it's now becoming more and more like a very viable path for game developers, um, very viable game engines for game developers. So I think the open source thing is already happening in the video game world, and a few other things like what Epic is doing with the um, what they call the UEFN framework, which is Unreal Engine for Fortnite. What they're doing is to turn the Fortnite the game uh, um, to make Fortnite less and less like a game and more like a virtual space where there would be countless what they call islands for players to create of their own. So players that go into that editor, go into that world, they can create isolated island, isolated worlds. That in that world they can create a lot of mini games, a lot of activities that they can do with their friends or the people that share values with them. So I think things like that show that there is a way to to sort of divert away from the traditional model of video games tracking people and you know dominating our agency, dominating our behavior in the virtual world into a world where we make the games that we play. And I think that's a very powerful message. And I think what Epic is doing. Of course, Epic is a very big company too, so we should of course reserve some skepticism to them. But I think what they're doing and a lot of other things that they are doing too are pushing the gaming industry into, I think, the a better system. So yeah, I think so. There are two qualities there: open source, and from open source we can go into a more democratic world where perhaps one day players don't have to rely on game developers to make the games that they want to play. And perhaps there will be a time where players can actually make the game that they want to play. And I think that will be a very, very beautiful world of the game industry. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure, it will be a very beautiful world, and especially you like each user, they don't just create their own game, but either way they create their own world. It's gonna be a very beautiful world, and I really look forward to it. But probably not in the next 10 years. I'm not so sure.
yeah, of course.
And thank you for your answer. It's much more articulated than a lot of the answers from other professors. Because when I designed this course, I often ask this one to some of the professors around me, and the only thing they could think about is to build socialism on the internet. And it was like, bro, no socialism. I mean, like it's a good idea, but it's a totally different game. It's not entirely like the first life we are living in right now. You have to consider like all other kind of stuff like the data center and the actual virtual platform and the device you use and some kind of new dynamics of
Yeah,
relationship between people and people. You have to consider everything. So we couldn't say that, well, I will
yeah.
create like socialism on social on a social platform.
Yeah.
So
May
it's
I
a
say
very
something?
well articulated. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I think it's better for us to focus on the technicality of the problems and not just not just building up sort of caricature of the wars that we have in the first life to imply that you want to build socialism on the internet is to imply that the enemy of socialism in real life also is present in the internet. And I mean, of course, that's true to some extent, but to just call something capitalism, say for example, or socialism on the internet is to diminish or is to glance over a lot of the technicalities of the second world. And I think at that point, when you want to build socialism on the internet, that's more like a proxy war of the war between, say, for example, capitalism and socialism in real life, and you want to bring that war into onto the internet. And I think at that point it kind of becomes meaningless. And I think let's not too get too focused on the ideology of the first world, and it's better to focus on the actual problems, the technicalities of the second world, and maybe perhaps when we get so good at looking at the technicality of the second world, we may build a very specific ideology for the second world, and that might be better than just bringing socialism onto the internet. Um, I hope you understand what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I think in this class we should prioritize the technicality of the problem instead of the ideality of the problem. They're totally
yeah,
two different things. With the technicality, we actually have the pragmatic response to changes instead of just saying that, wow, this is my dream world. And even though I don't know like the actual way to come there, but I still try to build something like that, which
yeah,
is impossible at this point in history.
yeah,
And actually, when as you talk about like transparency before, I suddenly think about this, which is something quite crazy, but also interesting for me, like a phenomenon in Vietnam. So I just read this piece of newspaper just a few weeks ago, and actually the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Vietnam, Tô Lâm, right?
yeah.
He just proposed to call the parliament not as the parliament anymore, but
Wow.
as the national dashboard. which is something
Mhm.
so interesting to me because we often say that okay, you have this game and they're trying to further develop this game into like like a virtual space, and now we have like the actual world, we have the actual material parliament, and they're
Yeah,
trying to virtualize it, they're trying to digitalize and in a way like gamifies like our political life, which is something very interesting, and I would love to talk about that, but probably in a different occasion.
yeah,
What I want to focus on like after like a lot of presentation and especially this beautiful crazily beautiful presentation we have today is um I want to address like this quotes from the great Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan. I often like drop his names everywhere in this class, but I want to drop his name again. That technology is not something that magical. It's actually like an extension of our life, an extension of humanity. And so, in order to understand the extension, we actually have to understand the core of it, humanity. In a way, we have to understand like the actual material arrangement and the actual relationship between people and people before talking about like the ideality of like a new world or something like that. So it's been 1.5 hours. I just wanna say thank you so much for spending time with us today, and I'm sure that my student will learn a lot of things from you. And I hope in the future probably we'll have like another chance to talk to each other. The second time. Thank you so much.
yeah. Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Mhm. Okay, stop recording.